Cadet blocked veteran pilot from entering the hangar until the wing commander demanded his return. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's incredible story. The hangar at a bustling Air Force base hummed with activity. Aircraft mechanics moved swiftly, technicians checked systems, and cadets stood at attention, waiting for orders. It was just another busy day on the base, but for one elderly man, it was a moment of reckoning. He stood outside the hangar gates, his hands trembling ever so slightly as he clutched his worn flight jacket. His eyes, however, were sharp and focused as ever, a gaze that had once steered fighter jets through fierce skies. The young cadet, fresh out of training, stood at the gate, his posture rigid with the confidence of youth. He didn't know who the man was or why he stood there, but he wasn't about to let anyone walk in without the proper clearance. The cadet's voice cut through the air, sharp and dismissive. "Sorry, sir. You can't come in without authorization. This is restricted." The veteran's weathered face remained calm, his years of military service having taught him how to face adversity without flinching. "I'm here for a reason," the old pilot replied quietly, his voice steady but filled with a depth that made the cadet pause. "I used to fly here, back when this base was just a training ground for rookies." The cadet, clearly not impressed, crossed his arms and scoffed. "Yeah, right, old man. You don't just walk into a hangar without the right credentials. You've got to have a pass." The cadet's smirk was almost a challenge, but the old pilot didn't respond in anger. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out an old, tarnished flight badge, the insignia long faded but still carrying weight. "This badge is worth more than any pass you'll ever hold," the veteran muttered. The cadet glanced at the badge, rolling his eyes. "Nice try, Grandpa. You can't fool me." At that moment, the veteran looked beyond the young cadet, eyes distant, as if searching for something far away. A flash of memory swept over him, flying over foreign terrain, pulling off impossible maneuvers to save lives, feeling the weight of responsibility and honor with every flight. The cadet, still standing firm, didn't see the silent history in the old man's eyes. But he was about to. Suddenly, the noise of approaching vehicles broke the tension. The sound of military trucks grew louder, their engines rumbling as they made their way toward the hangar. The cadet's posture shifted slightly, a subtle shift that showed he was nervous. The vehicles stopped, and out stepped a group of high-ranking officers. Leading them was the wing commander, his face stern, his eyes scanning the area as if he had expected something like this to happen. The wing commander locked eyes with the old veteran, recognition flickering across his face. "Sergeant Major Daniels?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with a deep respect. The cadet, confused and now a bit rattled, looked back and forth between the old man and the wing commander. "Wait a minute, you know him, sir?" The wing commander's gaze remained fixed on the veteran. "I do, and I suggest you step aside." The cadet, still unsure of what was going on, took a hesitant step back, his confidence now shattered. The wing commander turned to the old man. "Sergeant Major Daniels, it is an honor to have you back. Please, go ahead. We've been waiting for you." The cadet watched in stunned silence as the veteran, once dismissed as just an old man, walked past him with the ease and authority of someone who had earned his place in history. The wing commander nodded at the old pilot, a silent salute, as they walked toward the hangar together. The young cadet, still processing the turn of events, stood frozen, his entire perspective forever changed. The weight of the old veteran's past was something that could not be ignored. The wing commander's presence, combined with the veteran's quiet dignity, had turned the situation around in an instant. And for the cadet, it was a moment of learning that would stay with him for the rest of his life. As the wing commander led the veteran toward the hangar, the cadet stood frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief. His once confident stance now felt small and insignificant as he watched the old man walk past him, shoulders straight, and every step echoing a history that the young cadet could never have imagined. The sound of military boots echoed on the hangar floor as the wing commander and the veteran entered, the doors sliding open with a soft whir. The room fell into a heavy silence as they approached the aircrafts lined up for inspection. The other officers and cadets stood at attention, confused but intrigued. No one dared to speak. The veteran's presence was commanding, even in his old age, and the wing commander's solemn face only added to the gravity of the moment. The cadet, still at the entrance, looked at the scene unfolding before him. The veteran had been dismissed, mocked, and pushed aside just moments ago, yet now he was the center of attention. The wing commander stood next to the veteran, his voice low but firm. "This is Sergeant Major Daniels, one of the finest pilots we have ever had. I trust you'll all give him the respect he deserves." The cadet's stomach twisted. He had no idea who the man was, but the commanding officer's words made it clear that this wasn't just some old man with a flight badge. This was someone important. As the veteran stood next to the aircraft, his eyes scanning it with a professional's gaze, the cadet couldn't help but wonder what had made him so legendary. What had he done to earn such reverence? And why was he being treated like a hero now, after being dismissed like a fool just minutes ago? He watched as the veteran slowly ran his fingers along the smooth surface of the plane, his touch soft but deliberate. The wing commander stood silently beside him, his eyes never leaving the veteran's every move. The cadet wanted to say something, anything to break the silence, but he felt a lump form in his throat. He had never seen this kind of respect, this kind of power, from someone so ordinary in appearance. The veteran was no longer the old man from the street, no longer the one who had been laughed at and shunned. He was someone else now, someone who commanded the attention of the entire room, not with words, but with his mere presence. And it was in this moment that the cadet realized the depth of his mistake. He had dismissed the veteran as a relic, someone who had outlived his usefulness. But the truth was far from that. The veteran was more than just a symbol of the past. He was the very embodiment of the legacy that had shaped their military. The wing commander's voice broke the silence once more. "Sergeant Major Daniels, would you mind taking the lead on today's inspection?" The veteran turned to face him, a faint smile crossing his face. "Of course, sir," he replied, his voice steady and calm, the weight of his words carrying a silent authority. As the veteran moved forward, the cadet watched him carefully, his mind racing with questions. He had to know more, had to understand why this man was treated like a legend. What was his story? How had he earned the right to step into this hangar, to lead this inspection? The cadet's heart raced as he felt a new sense of humility washing over him. He had been wrong. This veteran, this old man, was no fool. He was a master, a true pilot, and a warrior who had proven his worth 1,000 times over. The cadet wanted to ask questions, to find out more, but he knew now was not the time. As the veteran began to inspect the aircraft, pointing out small details that the technicians had missed, the cadet took a step back, humbled by the realization of just how little he knew. His arrogance, his belief that the veteran was just an old relic of the past, shattered in an instant. The veteran was a living legend, and the cadet had just been given a front-row seat to his greatness. The day had only just begun, but already, the young cadet's world had been turned upside down. His entire perspective had shifted. The veteran had taught him something far more valuable than any textbook ever could. It was not about the equipment, the age, or the years that had passed. It was about respect, about earning your place through skill, experience, and honor. And in that moment, the cadet knew he had a long way to go before he could truly understand the depth of what it meant to serve. As the veteran finished his inspection, he turned to the wing commander with a nod of approval. The wing commander smiled, a rare expression of admiration crossing his face. "Well done, Sergeant Major. You've still got it." The veteran's smile was modest, but there was a twinkle in his eye. "Some things never change, sir," he said quietly. The cadet stood there, watching the exchange, his heart filled with a newfound respect for the man who had once been overlooked. He would never forget this day, the day that a veteran pilot had shown him what it truly meant to serve. The veteran's inspection had come to an end, but the ripple effect of his presence continued to linger in the hangar. The cadet, still standing near the doorway, found himself unable to look away. His earlier confidence had turned into quiet admiration as he watched the veteran move with a fluidity that seemed to come naturally, despite his age. The wing commander stood beside him, his face expressionless, but there was a gleam of pride in his eyes. "You see now?" he asked, his voice low enough for only the cadet to hear. The cadet nodded slowly, a sense of humility washing over him. He had been so quick to judge the veteran, so quick to assume that age and experience had no place in modern warfare. Now he realized just how wrong he had been. The veteran, Sergeant Major Daniels, was a living piece of history, someone who had fought battles in the skies, saving lives and changing the course of missions. The cadet's mind raced with questions, but he knew better than to speak. He had seen enough. The veteran's skill was undeniable, and now, the cadet understood that it wasn't just the machines they worked with that made them who they were. It was the people who commanded them. The cadet felt a tap on his shoulder, and he turned to see one of his fellow cadets, a young woman named Riley. "Hey, I heard what happened earlier. That guy, he's a legend, right?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. The cadet nodded. "Yeah, I think I figured that out," he replied, his voice still full of disbelief. "But I never knew about the history. How could I have been so blind?" Riley smiled knowingly. "Don't be too hard on yourself. Not many people realize who he is until they see him in action." As the two cadets exchanged words, they noticed the veteran walking toward them, his steps slow, but purposeful. The wing commander followed closely behind, his hands clasped behind his back. "Cadets," the veteran said, his voice gravelly but warm. "I hope you're learning something today. Experience is just as important as the newest technology. Never forget that." With a brief nod, he continued his walk, leaving the two cadets in stunned silence. The wing commander looked at them both, his expression softening. "Sergeant Major Daniels may be retired, but he's still the best pilot we've ever had. There's no one else like him." The cadet swallowed hard, a knot forming in his throat. "I can see that now," he murmured. "I just didn't understand before." The wing commander smiled slightly. "That's all right. Sometimes, it takes a hard lesson to get the message across. You're lucky. You've witnessed something many will never get to see. A living legend, still capable of doing what he does best." The cadet's eyes followed the veteran, who had reached the far end of the hangar. There was a sense of finality in the air, as if the veteran had completed his work for the day. As he turned to leave, the cadet couldn't help but feel a deep sense of respect for him. He had been wrong, so completely wrong, in thinking that age and experience were a burden. Now he knew better. As the veteran exited the hangar, the cadet stood for a moment, taking in everything he had just witnessed. His perspective had changed entirely. The world he had known, the world of new technology, new equipment, and new methods, wasn't all that mattered. The people who had been there, who had fought, bled, and sacrificed, were the ones who truly understood the essence of what it meant to serve. It wasn't about the tools they used, but about the lives they touched and the stories they carried with them. The cadet glanced at his fellow cadet, Riley, who had a thoughtful expression on her face. "What's next?" she asked. The cadet thought for a moment. I think we have a lot to learn," he replied quietly. Riley nodded. "Yeah, we do. But we'll get there." As the two cadets walked out of the hangar, their minds were filled with new thoughts, new questions, and a new sense of purpose. The veteran had left them with something far more valuable than just a lesson about respect. It had been a lesson about legacy. And as they moved forward, they knew they would carry that lesson with them every step of the way. The hangar had quieted down after the veteran's departure. The cadet stood at the back, watching as the wing commander and the others continued to work, but his mind was far away. The weight of the morning's events still hung over him, like a fog that wouldn't lift. What had started as a typical day, full of routine tasks and training exercises, had turned into something far more profound. He had seen firsthand how the past could command the present, how experience and legacy were more than just words. They were the essence of who they were as military personnel. As the cadet walked out of the hangar, he found himself lost in thought. His fellow cadet, Riley, had stayed behind for a bit, catching up with some of the others. But now, she caught up with him. "Hey, you all right?" she asked, concern in her voice. The cadet looked up, his eyes still distant. "I don't know," he replied quietly. "I guess I'm just still processing everything." Riley gave him a small smile, understanding more than he realized. "Yeah, I get it. I was the same way when I first realized what this place really is, what it means." The cadet nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. He had always known the military was important, but now, it felt different. It wasn't just about the missions or the equipment. It was about the people, about the veterans, the ones who had lived through it all and had come out the other side with stories that weren't written in any manual. I think, the cadet began, his voice thoughtful. I always thought the job was about the new planes, the new technology, the next big thing. But I didn't realize just how much the people, like Sergeant Major Daniels, shaped everything. All the stuff we do now is built on their experience. Riley smiled, her eyes lighting up with that same respect the cadet had seen in the others. Exactly. And it's not just about the victories or the medals. It's about the lessons they pass down. Every time we stand in this hangar, every time we're up in the sky, we're carrying those lessons with us. It's like a torch being passed from one generation to the next. The cadet paused, looking at the ground as he absorbed her words. I don't know if I'm ready for that, he admitted. I mean, how do I even begin to understand all that experience? Riley chuckled softly. You don't have to understand it all right now. None of us do. But you'll learn, just like the rest of us. One day, you'll find yourself teaching someone else. And you'll realize just how much of what you've learned is passed on, not just in words, but in how you carry yourself, how you lead, how you respect the people around you. The cadet felt a knot loosen in his chest. There was something reassuring about Riley's words. It wasn't just about being perfect or having all the answers. It was about showing up, doing the work, and passing on what had been taught. He hadn't been ready to understand all the lessons of the past, but maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to. As they walked together toward the mess hall, the cadet felt a weight lift from his shoulders. There was a long road ahead of him, a road filled with challenges and uncertainties. But for the first time, he didn't feel like he was facing it alone. He was part of something bigger, something far more significant than any piece of technology or equipment. He was part of a legacy that would carry him through the hardest days and the most difficult decisions. I think I'm starting to get it, the cadet said softly. Riley glanced at him, her smile widening. Yeah, you will. We all do. As they entered the mess hall, the cadet felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in a long time. He didn't have all the answers, and he wasn't sure what the future held. But he knew this. He was no longer just a cadet. He was part of something far greater. And with that thought, he sat down to his meal, ready to learn, to grow, and to someday pass the torch just as those before him had done. The cadet woke early the next morning, the sun just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the base. The events of the previous day were still fresh in his mind. Everything from the veteran's quiet authority to the moment the wing commander had spoken of the veteran's legacy. The cadet knew he had a long way to go before he truly understood the depth of what he had witnessed, but it felt like the beginning of something. He couldn't stop thinking about the veteran, Sergeant Major Daniels, and the respect he had commanded without saying a word. The cadet had seen what it meant to be a part of something bigger, something that went beyond rank or position. As he walked to the mess hall for breakfast, his thoughts drifted to his own future. He had always thought that the path to respect was through achievement, through pushing forward with the latest technology, or excelling in the latest drills. But now he realized that it wasn't about what you could do in a moment. It was about what you had done over a lifetime. The cadet sat down with Riley at breakfast, the two of them quietly eating. Riley was the first to speak. I overheard the wing commander talking to some of the other officers this morning, she said, her voice low. They've been working on a special project, and guess who's going to lead it? The cadet looked up, curious. Who? Riley's grin spread. Sergeant Major Daniels. They're bringing him back in for a mission. A real one, not just some training exercise. They've been needing someone with his experience. The cadet's heart skipped a beat. Wait, he's coming back for an actual mission? I thought he was retired. Riley nodded. He may be retired, but you don't just stop being a legend. They need someone who can handle anything. Someone who's been there and seen it all. He's still the best pilot they've got. The cadet leaned back in his chair, stunned. He had thought of Sergeant Major Daniels as a relic, someone who had served their time and moved on. But now, he was being called back in for something important. The realization hit him hard. There was so much more to the veteran than he had ever understood. It wasn't just about skill. It was about the ability to rise to any occasion, to bring the weight of experience and wisdom to whatever challenge lay ahead. That was something you couldn't learn from a manual. I guess it's not over until it's over, huh? The cadet said quietly, mostly to himself. Riley chuckled. Not by a long shot. You'll see. They don't call him a legend for nothing. The cadet couldn't help but smile. I think I'm starting to understand that. The day passed slowly, with the cadet finding himself distracted, his thoughts constantly drifting back to Sergeant Major Daniels and the upcoming mission. It was hard to imagine what it would be like to follow in his footsteps, to even begin to live up to that kind of legacy. But as the sun began to set and the cadet stood on the flight line, watching the planes take off in the distance, something inside him clicked. He had always thought that legacy was something that belonged to the past, to the veterans who had served before him. But now, he realized that legacy was something that continued to live on. It wasn't just about being a part of history. It was about carrying that history with you, shaping the future with everything you had learned. That was the true measure of respect. It wasn't about the planes you flew or the medals you wore. It was about the people you impacted, the lessons you passed down, and the way you carried yourself, no matter where you were in life. As the cadet turned to leave, he felt a new sense of purpose rising inside him. He wasn't just a cadet anymore. He was part of a larger story, one that had been written by those who came before him and would continue to be written by those who followed. And in that moment, he knew that he was ready to take the next step. No longer just looking up at the legends, but becoming one himself. The next few days on base were filled with anticipation. Word had spread quickly about Sergeant Major Daniels being brought back for an actual mission. The cadet couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time he saw an aircraft take off, his mind would wander back to the veteran's calm authority and the respect that had surrounded him. He couldn't shake the feeling that his life on the base was about to change. There was a buzz in the air now, a sense of purpose that seemed to infuse every soldier, every technician, and every cadet. Everyone knew that this mission was something special, and everyone knew that Sergeant Major Daniels, the man they had all dismissed just a few days earlier, was going to lead it. The cadet found himself staring at the hangar doors one afternoon, thinking back on everything that had happened. He had learned more in the last week than he had in months of training. But as he stood there, lost in thought, Riley approached him. She had a smile on her face, but there was a seriousness in her eyes. "You ready?" she asked. "For what?" He replied, still distracted. "For what comes next," she said. "For the mission." The cadet took a deep breath. He hadn't thought about it that way before. They were getting ready to go on a real mission, a mission led by the very man who had taught them all a lesson in respect. "I'm not sure I'm ready," he admitted. Riley raised an eyebrow. "No one is ever fully ready. You learn as you go, you get better, and you adapt. That's what being in the military is all about." The cadet nodded slowly. Riley was right. He had learned that much already. He had to stop worrying about being ready and start focusing on what he could contribute. As the days passed, the air around the base became heavier with the weight of preparation. Teams were getting organized, equipment was being checked, and orders were being passed down. Sergeant Major Daniels had already made his mark, offering wisdom and guidance to everyone who came into contact with him. The cadet had heard stories from some of the older soldiers about his past, about the missions he had flown, the lives he had saved, and the countless hours he had spent perfecting his craft. Every word only reinforced the idea that Sergeant Major Daniels wasn't just a legend. He was the kind of person who made history by living it. One evening, just as the sun began to set, the cadet found himself standing in front of the hangar once more, staring at the row of aircraft lined up for the mission. He wasn't alone this time. Riley stood next to him, her arms crossed as she watched the aircraft. "It's happening," the cadet said quietly, more to himself than to her. "Yeah," Riley replied. "And we're part of it now." The cadet smiled. It felt real now. Everything he had been through had led him to this point. He wasn't just training anymore. He was about to be part of something that mattered. He could hear the hum of the engines as the pilots prepared for takeoff, and he felt a knot form in his stomach. It wasn't fear. It was something else, something he couldn't quite name, but something that reminded him of how far he had come since that first day when he had mocked Sergeant Major Daniels. "Let's make sure we don't let him down," the cadet said, his voice steady. "We won't," Riley replied, her voice full of confidence. "We've learned what it means to serve, and we've learned what it means to respect." The hangar doors opened, and the cadet watched as the first few planes began to roll out. The mission was starting, and they were all a part of it now. Sergeant Major Daniels was at the helm, leading them into whatever challenges lay ahead. As the planes took off into the sky, the cadet felt a surge of pride. He wasn't just part of the team. He was a part of something much bigger. And as the last plane disappeared into the horizon, he knew one thing for sure. He was ready to face whatever came next, with the lessons of the past and the legacy of those who had come before him guiding his every step. The mission had been a success, but the aftermath was nothing like what the cadet had imagined. He had expected celebration, relief, maybe even a sense of pride in having been part of something so important. Instead, there was an overwhelming sense of quiet reflection that seemed to hang over the entire base. The planes had returned, their engines humming softly as they rolled back into the hangar. The cadet stood there, watching as the ground crew worked methodically, unloading the equipment and checking the planes for damage. It wasn't until Riley came up beside him that he spoke. "It feels different, doesn't it?" he asked. Riley looked at him, her face serious, her eyes reflecting the same thoughts. "It's not what we expected, but it's more real than anything we've done here." The cadet nodded, still processing. "I thought we'd be celebrating, but there's something about this that feels heavy. We just did something big, but it's not like the movies, is it?" Riley chuckled softly, though it lacked humor. "No, it's not. This is the part they don't show you. The quiet after the storm. The people who made it happen, and the ones who didn't make it home." The cadet looked at her, his expression solemn. "I don't know if I'm ready for that part." Riley met his gaze. "None of us are. But we'll deal with it. We don't have a choice." They stood in silence for a while, watching the team finish up their work. The cadet couldn't help but think back to the veteran, Sergeant Major Daniels. He had been the one to lead them through this, to guide them with a steady hand and an unwavering sense of purpose. The cadet had learned so much from him, not just about flying or military tactics, but about what it meant to carry the weight of experience. Sergeant Major Daniels had lived through things the cadet couldn't even imagine, yet he carried it with a quiet dignity that the cadet now understood. As they began to move toward the briefing room, the cadet couldn't shake the feeling that the mission wasn't truly over. They had completed their task, yes, but there was more to come. The real work was only just beginning. Inside the briefing room, the team gathered around the table, their faces tired but resolute. Sergeant Major Daniels stood at the front, his hands clasped behind his back as he addressed them. "You did good," he said, his voice steady, the slightest hint of pride in his words. "But this mission isn't over. Not for us. Not for anyone who's ever served." The room was silent as they all processed his words. The cadet looked around at his team, his fellow cadets, and the seasoned soldiers. They had all been through something together, something that had changed them. "You think it's done, don't you?" Sergeant Major Daniels continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "But it's never over. Not when you've lived the way we have. The work doesn't end with the mission. It continues, in every lesson, in every action. What we did today is just one chapter. Tomorrow, we go back to the grind. To training, to preparation. Because there's always more." The cadet's mind raced. The mission had been important, yes. But there was so much more to being part of this world, this military life. It wasn't just about fighting wars or winning battles. It was about carrying the legacy of those who had come before, about continuing the work, and about being ready for whatever came next. The veteran had shown them that, and now, it was their turn to carry that torch. After the briefing, the cadet stepped outside into the cool evening air, the sky fading to a deep purple. The sound of the planes and helicopters in the distance was a constant hum in the background. He breathed deeply, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. He wasn't the same person who had arrived on this base. He had seen the truth of service, the sacrifice that came with it, and the quiet strength of the people who made it their life. Riley joined him outside, her hands in her pockets. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft. "Yeah," he replied, his voice steady. "I think I'm starting to understand. It's not about the victories or the medals. It's about what you do every day, the people you serve with, the lessons you pass down." She nodded, a small smile on her face. "Exactly. And you're ready for that. We all are." The cadet felt a sense of clarity wash over him. He didn't have all the answers, and he didn't know what the future held. But he knew one thing for sure. He was no longer just a cadet. He was part of something much bigger, something that mattered. And that was the first step toward becoming the person he was meant to be. The next morning, the cadet awoke to the sound of engines revving outside, the base coming to life as it did every day. But today felt different. There was a quiet sense of anticipation in the air, a shift in the atmosphere that hadn't been there before. As he dressed and prepared for the day ahead, His mind wandered back to the mission, back to Sergeant Major Daniels and the lessons he had imparted. The cadet had been working hard to understand those lessons, and they were beginning to sink in. But there was more to learn, more to experience. After breakfast, Riley approached him, a knowing look in her eyes. "You're ready, right?" she asked. "For what?" The cadet replied, still a bit foggy from the early morning haze. "For what comes next," she said, nudging him slightly. "The wing commander called a meeting. We're heading out again soon. This time it's real. No more drills, no more prep. It's time for the next chapter." The cadet's heart skipped a beat. He had expected more training, more lessons. But this was different. This was the real deal. "I'm ready," he said, more to himself than to Riley. But she nodded, understanding. The day moved quickly after that. The team was called together, their orders clear. They were heading out for a tactical exercise, one that would test everything they had learned so far. Sergeant Major Daniels would be with them, of course, leading them. The cadet couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for everything the veteran had shared with them. The journey they were on wasn't just about following orders. It was about understanding the weight of responsibility, the history behind every mission, and the people who had come before them. As they boarded the transport, the cadet sat quietly, his eyes focused ahead. Riley sat next to him, her eyes scanning the surroundings. The engines roared to life, and the familiar rumble of the vehicle filled the air. This was it, the moment they had all been preparing for. The cadet wasn't sure what to expect, but he was certain of one thing. He was no longer just a cadet. He was part of something much bigger than himself. The transport rolled to a stop, and the team disembarked, their boots hitting the ground with purpose. The air was thick with the promise of action, and the cadet's senses were heightened. He could hear the sounds of the team moving into position, the rustling of equipment, the soft commands being exchanged. This was no longer training. This was the real deal. As Sergeant Major Daniels walked past, the cadet couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The man was a living legend, but it wasn't just his past that commanded respect. It was his presence in the moment. The way he moved, the way he carried himself, was a reminder of what true leadership looked like. The cadet followed quietly, his mind racing with the lessons he had learned. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one that would test everything he had learned and everything he had yet to understand. The mission itself was a blur. There were moments of intense focus, moments when every step felt like it mattered, when every decision could be the difference between success and failure. The cadet found himself relying on everything Sergeant Major Daniels had taught him. The veteran had instilled in him a sense of duty, a sense of respect for the mission, and most importantly, a sense of respect for the people around him. As the day drew to a close, the team gathered in the debriefing room, their faces tired but proud. They had completed the mission successfully, and there was a sense of satisfaction in the air. But it wasn't the end. It was just another chapter in their journey. Sergeant Major Daniels stood at the front, his eyes scanning the team. "You did well," he said, his voice calm and measured. "But remember, this is just the beginning. There's always more to learn, always more to do. Never stop moving forward." The cadet looked around the room, seeing the same mix of pride and determination on the faces of his teammates. They had all grown in ways they hadn't expected. And while the journey was far from over, the cadet knew one thing for sure. He was ready for whatever came next. As he left the room, Riley fell into step beside him. "You did good today," she said. "We all did. But don't forget what Sergeant Major Daniels said. It's just the beginning. There's always more." The cadet nodded, the weight of her words settling in. He was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, ready to carry the legacy of those who had come before, and ready to continue learning, growing, and serving. The days after the mission passed in a blur, but the cadet couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion or the weight of the mission that lingered. It was the sense of responsibility that had settled into his chest. The confidence he once had, the belief that he could handle any challenge on his own, had been replaced by a deeper understanding of what it meant to serve, to be part of something much bigger than himself. Sergeant Major Daniels had shown him what true leadership looked like, not through speeches or displays of strength, but through his actions, his quiet resolve, and the way he commanded respect without ever needing to ask for it. The cadet was no longer just going through the motions of training. He was now actively learning the value of service, of legacy, and of the duty that came with wearing the uniform. One evening, after a long day of training and debriefing, the cadet found himself sitting alone outside, looking up at the stars. The air was cool, and the sounds of the base had quieted down for the night. He thought about the veterans he had met over the past few weeks, about the stories they had shared, and about the one lesson that kept echoing in his mind. That being a part of this world wasn't just about the here and now. It was about carrying the weight of history, of those who had come before, and of the responsibility to pass that knowledge down to those who would follow. As he sat there, lost in thought, Riley walked up and sat beside him, her presence a comforting reminder of the bond they had formed over the past few months. "You good?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. The cadet nodded slowly. "Yeah, just thinking. I didn't expect all of this. I mean, I knew the military was about duty and honor, but I didn't realize how much it was about legacy, about being part of something that's bigger than just yourself." Riley smiled and nodded. "It's a hard lesson to learn, but it's the most important one. It's not about being the best at everything or having all the answers. It's about learning from the people who've been here before you and making sure you pass that on when it's your turn." The cadet looked over at her, a sense of gratitude filling him. "I never thought of it like that," he admitted. "But you're right. We're just a link in the chain, you know?" Riley's smile widened. "Exactly. And every link is important. You're learning that. We're learning that. And one day, it'll be our turn to lead. Just like Sergeant Major Daniels." The cadet sat in silence for a moment, letting her words sink in. He had seen leadership in action on that mission, not in the form of orders being barked or medals being handed out, but in the way the veteran had carried himself. It was a quiet strength, a calm authority that spoke volumes without needing to be heard. Sergeant Major Daniels had shown them all what it meant to truly serve, and the cadet now understood that this wasn't just a job. It was a calling. It was about stepping up when it mattered, about doing the right thing, and about carrying the weight of those who had come before him. The stars above seemed to shimmer a little brighter that night, and for the first time in a long time, the cadet felt at peace. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew he was ready to face it. As long as he carried the lessons of the past with him, as long as he remembered the sacrifices that had been made and the wisdom that had been passed down, he would be ready. And that was enough. "Let's go get some rest," Riley said, standing up and stretching. The cadet nodded, standing with her. "Yeah, tomorrow's another day." As they made their way back to their barracks, the cadet couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose he hadn't known before. The journey wasn't over, not by a long shot, but he was no longer just a cadet. He was part of something much bigger, and he was ready to do his part. Sergeant Major Daniels had shown him the way, and now it was time for him to follow that example and one day, just maybe, become a leader in his own right. The days blurred together as the cadet and his team settled back into their routine, but something was different now. The weight of the mission they had completed, the lessons they had learned, and the leadership they had witnessed stayed with them. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion that lingered. It was the feeling of being part of something much larger than themselves. They weren't just soldiers following orders. They were inheriting a legacy, a responsibility that had been passed down through the generations. As they prepared for the next phase of training, the cadet couldn't help but think back to Sergeant Major Daniels. The veteran had led them through their most difficult moments with a calm resolve, showing them that true leadership wasn't about barking orders or standing in the spotlight. It was about being there when it mattered, showing up, and doing what needed to be done, regardless of the cost. It wasn't about glory, but duty. The cadet had started to see that duty in a new light. He had always thought of the military as a career, a path toward advancement, recognition, and success. But now, he realized it was much more than that. It was about the people they served, the mission they upheld, and the legacy they carried. It was about honoring those who had gone before and ensuring that the lessons they had learned were passed on to the next generation. "You've been quiet," Riley said, pulling the cadet from his thoughts as they sat together in the mess hall. "What's going on?" The cadet shrugged, trying to find the words. "I'm just thinking," he said slowly. "I never realized how much this really means. I always thought it was just about getting the job done, you know? But there's so much more to it. The responsibility, the history, the legacy." Riley smiled, her eyes filled with understanding. "It's hard to wrap your head around at first," she said. "But it's the truth. We're not just here to serve ourselves. We're part of something much bigger, just like those who came before us. And just like they did for us, we're going to have to do the same for the next generation. The cadet nodded, taking in her words. I know. I've been thinking about that a lot. And I've realized, I'm not sure I'm ready for that responsibility yet, but I know I need to be. I need to understand what it means to be part of this, to be part of something that goes beyond me. Riley leaned back in her chair, considering him carefully. I don't think anyone ever feels truly ready. But that's the point. We learn as we go. And when it's our turn to lead, we'll do it the same way those before us did, with respect, with honor, and with the understanding that it's not about us. It's about everyone else. The cadet smiled, the weight of her words sinking in. It was a truth that he had come to understand over the past few weeks, but hearing it from Riley made it feel more real. This was the path they were on, one where the focus was always on others, where leadership meant taking care of the people around you, no matter the cost. He looked at Riley, grateful for her wisdom and for the friendship they had built. I think I get it now, he said softly. And I'm ready. I'll learn what I need to, and I'll be there for the people who need me. Just like Sergeant Major Daniels. Riley's smile widened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. I knew you'd get it. We're all in this together. And when it's time, you'll be just as ready as the rest of us. As they finished their meal and prepared for the next training session, the cadet felt a sense of peace he hadn't known before. He wasn't the same person who had first arrived at the base. He had grown, learned, and started to understand the true meaning of service. And while there was still much to learn, he knew that with each passing day, he was becoming more and more ready to carry on the legacy that had been passed down to him. Sergeant Major Daniels had shown him the way, not just through words, but through his actions, and now it was his turn to walk that path. No longer just a cadet, the cadet was becoming a part of something bigger. He was becoming a leader, one step at a time. The weeks following their most recent mission felt like a turning point for the cadet. The daily grind of training and routine had become more meaningful now. Every drill, every exercise, every word spoken by the instructors and officers had a weight to it that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just about going through the motions anymore. It was about learning, growing, and preparing for the day when the cadet would be the one leading, the one setting the example. Sergeant Major Daniels had made that clear in every interaction he had, and the cadet had finally come to understand it fully. But there was still a lingering question that he couldn't quite shake. Was he really ready for the responsibility? The cadet was sitting in the briefing room one afternoon when the wing commander walked in, flanked by a couple of senior officers. The team had been notified that there was a new mission coming up, one that would require all of them. The air was thick with anticipation as the officers stood before the group, laying out the details. The cadet listened closely, taking in every word, but there was something else in the back of his mind, a reminder of what he had learned from Sergeant Major Daniels. This mission wasn't just another task. It wasn't just a box to check off. It was another opportunity to prove himself, to step up and take on the responsibilities of a leader. You've all done well, the wing commander said, his voice steady. But this mission will push you further than anything you've faced so far. You will be tested in ways that will challenge your skills, your patience, and your ability to lead. The cadet felt the weight of those words. They weren't just for the others, they were for him too. He had been so focused on following the example set by those before him. But now it was his turn to lead, to take responsibility for the actions of his team. You may have thought you were ready for what comes next, the wing commander continued. But this mission will test your resolve in ways you can't yet imagine. And when it's over, you will look back and see just how far you've come. The cadet's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but he knew that this was his chance to step up and prove to himself, and to everyone else, that he could carry the weight of the legacy that had been placed on him. As the briefing ended, the cadet and Riley made their way out of the room, each lost in their thoughts. They had trained together, learned together, and now, they were about to face their biggest challenge yet. You okay? Riley asked as they walked down the hallway. The cadet nodded, though his mind was racing. Yeah, he said, his voice more uncertain than he'd intended. Just thinking. This mission, it feels different. It feels like everything I've learned up until now is leading to this point. Riley gave him a side glance, her expression thoughtful. It should feel different. This is your time to step up. We've all been learning for a reason. Now it's time to show what we're made of. The cadet smiled slightly, appreciating her words. Yeah, I just need to make sure I'm doing it right. Riley chuckled softly. There's no right way. Just do it. Lead the way you've seen others lead. You don't have to have all the answers, but you need to show up. That's what matters. As they continued their walk, the cadet felt the weight of his responsibility settle on his shoulders. It was a heavy feeling, but it wasn't overwhelming. It was the kind of weight that came with knowing he had a duty to the team, to the legacy, and to the men and women who had come before him. The mission loomed ahead, but instead of feeling afraid or uncertain, the cadet felt something else. He felt ready. As the team gathered for the mission briefing the next morning, the cadet stood with a quiet confidence. He wasn't the same person who had arrived at the base, unsure of what it all meant. He had learned what it meant to serve, to lead, and to carry the legacy of those who had come before. Sergeant Major Daniels had shown him the way, and now, it was his turn to walk that path. The mission was underway, and the cadet was no longer just a follower. He was a leader, ready to take on whatever came next. And as the planes roared to life around him, he knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. One that he was ready to write, one step at a time. The mission had been a whirlwind, with everything happening so fast that the cadet barely had time to process the full scope of it. The hours on the field, the tactical exercises, the debriefings, and the constant pressure to perform, it all blurred together, and yet, at the end of it, he knew something had changed. The cadet had stepped into his role in a way he hadn't anticipated, finding himself taking on more responsibility and ownership with each passing hour. He had proven to himself, and to those around him, that he was ready for the challenges that lay ahead. But as the mission wrapped up and the team prepared to return to base, there was still a lingering sense of reflection that weighed on him. He had heard stories about how these moments shaped soldiers, how they would look back on a mission like this and see it as a turning point in their career, a moment that defined them. For the cadet, he wasn't sure yet if this mission had been that for him, but he knew it would be a part of his story forever. Sergeant Major Daniels had been with them throughout, guiding them with the quiet authority that only comes from years of experience. The cadet had learned so much from him, but now, as they prepared to head back to base, there was one thing the cadet still needed to hear. One final lesson. The team gathered on the tarmac, each soldier going over their equipment, ensuring everything was in order. The sound of engines starting and the chatter of the crew filled the air. As the cadet stood off to the side, Sergeant Major Daniels approached him, his steps slow but purposeful. The cadet stood up straighter, instinctively, as the veteran came closer. You did well, Cadet, Sergeant Major Daniels said, his voice calm but with a hint of approval. The cadet was taken aback. I did, he asked, not sure if he had earned the praise. You did, Daniels replied, his eyes steady. You showed leadership, focus, and the ability to listen when it mattered. But remember, this mission was just one step in a much longer journey. The real test is what comes next. The cadet nodded slowly, taking in the veteran's words. It wasn't the praise he was seeking. It was the guidance, the understanding that this was only the beginning. I'm not sure I'm ready for what comes next, the cadet admitted. None of us are, not really, Sergeant Major Daniels said. But that's what makes us who we are. We push forward, we face the unknown, and we do what we have to do. The real test isn't how we perform on the field. It's how we handle what comes after when the dust settles and the mission is over. That's when your character shows. The cadet thought about that for a moment. It made sense to him now. He had focused so much on the mission itself, on completing the task at hand. But the true challenge was in what happened after the mission ended. How did he lead his team then? How did he carry the lessons forward? I understand, the cadet said finally. It's not just about the mission. It's about who we are when it's over. Sergeant Major Daniels gave a small nod. Exactly. You've got the right mindset. Now keep it with you. With that, the veteran turned and walked toward the rest of the team. The cadet stood there for a moment, watching him. There was so much more he had yet to learn, but for the first time, he felt ready to take on whatever came next. He wasn't just a cadet anymore. He was becoming a leader. As the team boarded the transport and began their journey back to base, the cadet couldn't help but reflect on the lessons that had shaped him so far. He had learned to lead not by dominating, but by understanding, by listening, and by accepting the responsibility that came with it. Sergeant Major Daniels had shown him the way, but it was up to him to carry it forward. The cadet was no longer the same person who had first arrived on base, unsure and uncertain. He had grown, and as the transport rumbled toward the base, he knew that his journey was far from over. This mission had been just one chapter in a much bigger story, one that would continue to unfold with every lesson, every challenge, and every moment of growth. And with that thought in mind, he felt a sense of purpose settle in. He was ready for whatever came next. The base had returned to its usual rhythm after the mission, but for the cadet, it felt like the world had shifted beneath him. Every moment of the past weeks had been a lesson, each experience pushing him further into a role he was slowly coming to understand. As he walked through the halls of the base, his thoughts lingered on the last conversation he had with Sergeant Major Daniels. The veteran's words echoed in his mind, especially the reminder that the real test would come after the mission, once the dust settled. How would he carry himself in the quiet moments? How would he lead in times when there was no battle to fight, but only the duty to serve? It was an overwhelming thought, one that stirred something deep within him. He wasn't just a cadet anymore. He had learned what it meant to be part of something larger, something far beyond the individual. The lessons from the mission had not only taught him tactical skills and leadership, but had instilled in him a profound respect for the history, the sacrifices, and the responsibility that came with wearing the uniform. That responsibility was something he hadn't fully understood before. But now, as he stood in the barracks, looking at the uniform he had been so eager to wear when he first arrived, he realized it wasn't just about what he could do in the moment. It was about what he was willing to do for the people around him, for the legacy he carried, and for the future of the military that depended on those who would lead after him. As the days passed, the cadet found himself falling into the rhythms of base life once again. But this time, it was different. There was a new awareness, a new understanding of the true meaning of service. It wasn't about the accolades, the praise, or the recognition. It was about doing the job well, doing it with integrity, and doing it for something bigger than yourself. He had seen it in Sergeant Major Daniels, who had never sought recognition but had always led with quiet strength and confidence. And now, the cadet knew it was his turn to step up and carry that same strength forward. One evening, as the cadet sat in the mess hall, Riley joined him. She had a look of quiet satisfaction on her face, and it didn't take long for the cadet to realize why. The mission had tested them all, but they had passed. They had proved to themselves, to their team, and to their superiors that they were ready for the next step. "What's next for you?" Riley asked, taking a seat across from him. The cadet looked up from his meal, considering her question. "I'm not sure yet," he said, "but I think I'm ready. I think I'm ready to lead." Riley smiled, a look of pride in her eyes. "I knew you'd get there. We all get there in our own time. It's about learning, growing, and being ready for what's ahead." The cadet nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle into his chest. He wasn't the same person who had first arrived at the base, uncertain and unsure of his place in the military. He had changed, had grown into the kind of person who could lead with integrity and honor. And though the path ahead would be challenging, he knew he was ready. As the week drew to a close, the cadet found himself reflecting on the journey he had taken, from the new recruit who had been full of questions to the young leader he was becoming. The mission had been a defining moment, yes, but it was only one of many. The real work lay ahead. He would continue to face challenges, make mistakes, and learn from them. But now, he understood what it meant to be part of something bigger than himself. He understood the weight of the uniform, the responsibility it carried, and the legacy he was now a part of. He had learned that leadership wasn't just about taking charge when things were easy. It was about showing up when it was hard, stepping up when others needed support, and always remembering the sacrifices made by those who had come before. As he prepared for the next chapter of his military career, the cadet knew that he had only just begun. The lessons from Sergeant Major Daniels, the experiences of the mission, and the quiet moments of reflection would guide him as he moved forward. He was ready to face whatever came next, not with the arrogance of someone who thought they knew it all, but with the quiet confidence of someone who understood the true meaning of service. And with that understanding, he knew he was ready to be the leader they all needed him to be. In this emotional story, a young cadet learns the true meaning of service, leadership, and legacy through his experiences on a military base. From the first mission to the quiet moments of reflection, The cadet's journey is filled with lessons that shape his understanding of what it means to serve in the military. The emotional story takes readers through the challenges, growth, and moments of clarity that define a soldier's path. As he watches the veterans around him and learns from the quiet strength of Sergeant Major Daniels, the cadet begins to understand that leadership is not about taking charge when things are easy, but about stepping up when it's hard. This emotional story reveals how one mission can change a person's perspective on duty, responsibility, and honor. It's not just about completing a task, but about understanding the importance of those who came before and passing that knowledge forward. Through the emotional story, we see the transformation of a cadet into a leader, ready to carry the weight of the military legacy with pride and responsibility. The emotional story continues to unfold as the cadet learns that true leadership is built on respect, honor, and the quiet moments that define a life of service.